Great, so we're going to start off today with just a quick little Zoom poll to learn a bit more about who all of you are and where you're from. So we'll share that and let you fill it out.
Just one moment.
Perfect, so you should see a poll with 2 questions on the screen. Welcome. If you're just joining us, we are getting started with a little introductory poll. Great, so I think I'll jump to our agenda, and then if other people join, they can continue to take that poll as well. So thank you all so much for joining us today at 9 a.m. on this beautiful Tuesday. We're really excited to host our 3rd webinar as part of our series from the kinshipcareca.org project. So we will be spending the majority of this webinar with our wonderful partner, Mikia Castillo, and she is, she is actually feeding her baby right now, but we'll be back on soon and you'll all get to meet her. So we are going to share a recording that she and her team did on the intersection of incarceration and immigration with kinship care. So we were able to share this presentation with our statewide advisory committee a couple months ago, and it was such an informative presentation, and we just knew we had to get it out to a broader audience. So we are doing this webinar today, and it's also going to be posted to our Kinship Care CA Facebook page. So if you know of people that are wanting to access this after today, they can find it on our Facebook. So Mikia will be joining us for a live Q&A session. So at about 9:30, we'll hand it over to all of you to have a discussion with her, and we can ask questions and all learn together. And then if we have time at the end of this, we will do a little demo of our kinshipcareca.org website. But that's really only if we have time, because we definitely want to spend the bulk of our morning learning and talking with Mikia and her team. So I always like to just ground us in what the kinship community is and what it means to us. So as you can see on the screen, it says that many children and youth are raised by relatives other than their biological parents, both formally in the foster care system and outside of it. So this is how we define the kinship community. Oh, my screen's not, there we go. So our presentation today is around how the kinship community intersects with immigration and incarceration. And you have a stat here on the screen that says that, newly accompanied minors are effectively foster children. And last year alone, there were 76,000 minors that were apprehended. So we just share that to kind of ground us in how prevalent of an issue this is, and just how this intersection is very, very big and very meaningful. So with that, I think we will go ahead and jump into the actual recorded presentation. I do just want to remind us all that we are recording this webinar. So if you are not wanting your name to be broadcast it online, you're welcome to click the little 3 dots in the corner of your Zoom window and change your name. Yeah, without further ado, we'll jump in to the presentation. And Melissa, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
We are having some technical difficulties. If you want to talk a little bit about the website and maybe demo that for a few moments, then I'll be right back to you.
Sure, no problem. Okay, so let me exit this. Okay, so while we are getting the video set up, I'm just going to quickly bring you all to our website. And I think many of you that are on this webinar today have seen this already, but it's always good to just remind us all of where it lives and what we can access. So a cool feature of our site is that it's free and open to everyone, and you can become a member. So if you wanted to become a member, you would just click here, go to my account. However, you are not required to be a member. This service is available to anyone, so you can continue as a guest if that is your preference. The benefits of being a member are that you can save all of the information and return to it later. You have more access to screening tools for state and federal benefits. You also receive special resources and newsletters. But like I said, the site is open to everyone. I'm just going to click this accept button here. This just says that we use cookies. So here is our home page for the Kinship Navigator. And so this website is really designed for any kinship caregivers, any service providers, or a kinship youth themselves to access resources and services 24/7 in California. So there's a lot of ways you can use this site and this program. You can use what we call our guided search. So that's here, this homepage. You can just let us know a little bit about who you are and enter your city or your zip code. I'll go ahead and enter where I am today. I'm in Sacramento. And then this will take you to another page where you've got lots of different categories of resources that we know are useful and helpful to kinship families. So if you wanted to find specific resources on how to find a job, clothing for an interview, financial literacy, you can browse through here and then actually click one, and it will take you to a map that will show you where resources are located. You'll see we have a whole bunch in Sacramento, so maybe I'll zoom in a bit to see where exactly all of these are. I can also scroll down and see specific resources. This button that says add to binder, this is here so that I can save my information and return to it later. So I'm not gonna, go through all the details, but just to give you a kind of 30,000 foot view. The other thing I will share though is this little button. You should see this on every page. This is Get Live Help. So we know that the website is a really great tool, but maybe you didn't find what you were looking for, or maybe you just need to speak with a professional kinship navigator that is really well versed in the services that you need. So here you can fill in your phone number and get a call back. So you could just enter your number here. Oops, but they're telling me I did it wrong. Or you can call directly. So you could click here and make a call from your computer, your smartphone, or even just dial this number. So that will allow you to connect directly with the kinship specialist 24/7 to help answer any questions you may have, help you navigate through various resources and services that you're looking for. We also have a little texting chat feature. So if you wanted to talk through or navigate the site through our web bot, you can do this. I'll ask you a couple questions, but then you can, ask questions here about kinship care as well. Melissa, are you should I continue or?
We're all good. Thank you very much.
Great. So if you do have questions on the website, feel free to save them, and we can try and squeeze them in with the Q&A. But if the presentation is ready to go, then we will go to that. Oh, I'm great. And Lamika is back. Perfect timing. Oh, that's the recording. Sorry. I thought that was actually Lamika. It is.
Here we
so
go.
In the video, you'll see myself and Lamika. Obviously, we're dressed differently because this was recorded a couple months ago. All right, I will stop talking.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Here we go.
Castillo, and I am one of the founders of Castillo.
I'm just making sure everybody can hear okay. Claire?
Yep.
Can you? Okay, good. Perfect. I'll continue. Thank you.
Castillo Consulting Partners. We do leadership development through the lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, and have had the privilege of working with United Way of Greater LA on some leadership development work and civic engagement for youth in the past, and over the past several months have worked with United Ways of California to support with the development of the LA portion of the database and resources for kinship caregivers. And so we're really honored to be able to join you today. We have a dynamic team, and they put together a presentation to help you all think about and understand some of the connections between kinship care, incarceration, and immigration. I'll have the team introduce themselves when they present, but we just wanted to say that we've had a great time working with Claire over the past several months to really put the data, to help to build the database that is going to be used on the website for LA. And every member of our team has some type of connection or affiliation to kinship care, immigration, incarceration, child welfare. And so we come at this work not just from a academic or professional lens, but from a very deeply personal lens as well. And want to hope that is conveyed in the presentation that we give to you. So with that, I will share my screen so you all can see the presentation. And as I share my screen, we would love for you all to introduce yourselves, and then I'll just at least share the names of our team members, and then we'll get going here. So we have with us today Mikia Castillo, Daniel Moreno, and Takaija Bryant, and they will be presenting in that order. So if you all could introduce yourselves in the chat, we would like to know if you could share, please, your name, your pronouns, and your organization or affiliation. If you could tell us something about, why you're a part of this council, your affiliation with kinship care. If we have more time, we would love to hear from every person out loud, but because we have a short amount of time, we won't be able to do that, unfortunately, but we do hope to connect with you all at another point through our work with United Way. I didn't mention my pronouns earlier. Mine are she, her, and hers. So what we're going to do over our next 30 or so minutes together is we'll give you an overview of incarceration and kinship care, what the connections are between those two. I think a lot of times when folks think of kinship care, we think of grandparents raising children, but sometimes we don't think of how the grandparents got the children. I myself have been a kinship caregiver, and I'm not a grandparent. And so I think oftentimes also people, when we hear the word kinship care, we think of grandparents raising grandchildren, but a lot of times it's actually not just grandparents who are raising the grandchildren. There are other adults, including siblings of the children who are in kinship care. And so I think that's going to come up a lot in our conversations around incarceration as well as immigration. We want to help you see the link between not just kinship care and incarceration, but also immigration and incarceration, those two connections, and then also immigration and kinship care. So Megan is going to talk to us about incarceration and kinship care. Daniel will talk to us about the connection between those, between incarceration and immigration and kinship care. And then Takaija will provide us with some ideas about how we can support families who have loved ones incarcerated and or impacted by the immigration system and are raising children in kinship care. And then we'll open it up to questions. So our objectives for today, again, are just to help you understand these different connections between these issues, and then really, as a council who is helping United Way to think about what it looks like to support kinship families best, we really want to provide you with some suggestions and recommendations for you all to think about with regards to these specific populations, children with parents who are incarcerated and children with parents who are immigrants, whether they are here in this country or have been, returned back to their home country through our legal system. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Megan, and she's going to talk to us about incarceration and kinship care.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Hello? Yes, we can hear me? Okay, great. My screen is freezing, so hopefully the connection is well. So thank you all for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all. I'm just going to talk very briefly about incarceration and kinship care. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I can't tell if the next slide is up.
Sorry, it is up. It is up, Megan. Sorry, I'm connection issues. I think many of us are having connection issues because of the fire and things. So, I'll let you know. Yeah, whenever you ask to change it, we'll make sure it's changed. Thanks, everybody, for your patience with that.
Thank you all for your patience. So, we're thinking about incarceration and kinship care. One of the things that is important is looking at the number of children who grow up with a parent in prison during some of the proportion of the formative years, and recognizing that that number is, always increasing. But yet we know very little about the children and the care that they receive. So some of those numbers include 2.3 million people are incarcerated in federal and state prisons on the whole. 93% are male, 40% are Black, and 62% are female prisoners, and 51 are male inmates and have children under the age of 18. And so that kind of paints the picture of just how drastic this entity is, and this function of our criminal justice system and our family system works. And then again, 7.8 million children live with a relative who is in the head of their household, and 2.5 million are raised with kin without a birth parent. So that's about, that's 120,000 people, about 5%, who live with their kinship and who are foster parents. Next slide. Great. So on the whole, nearly 6 million children are impacted by parental incarceration. 62% of female prisoners and 51%, have children under the age of 18. 57% are Latinx male prisoners are fathers, and 54% of Black prisoners are male fathers. Um, 1.7 million children currently have parents in a federal or state prison. So that's 22% of these children are under the age of 5. 28% are 5 to 10 years old, 34% are 10 to 14 years old, and 16% are 5 to 18-year-olds. So the question leaves, who takes care of the children and whose parents are in prison? And so we recognize that those who are most impacted by this are youth of color. They are often LGBTQ identified youth, and they are often youth who have mental illnesses or mental health concerns, and they are almost always Black children. So Black children are 2 times as likely to be placed in foster care as white children. And so then we have to ask ourselves, just how are they impacted, right? So foster children, particularly girls who are targeted, are targeted by sex traffickers. And 1/4 of the foster care alumni will be incarcerated with 2 years of exiting care. And so I think it's important to point this out because it really points to the nuances, right? So once you're in the sex trafficking realm, you immediately become criminalized, right? And that's an entry point into the criminal justice system and the juvenile detention center. likewise for those who have already been in foster care. So there are a lot of nuances to this experience as youth, and particularly as it pertains to foster youth in the connection with incarcerated lifestyles. Next slide.
It's up. It's up. I'm sorry. I think there's a delay on your end, unless it's a delay
It
on.
probably is.
Okay.
It's probably on my end, but I'm going to try to pull it up on my phone just so that I can have the slides as well. So I just wanted to share this short narrative. 22-year-old Bronx native Randy, who entered into foster care when he was 10, moving through 13 placements at 3 boroughs of New York City during his time in the system. When he was 14, Randy got into a fight with another boy in his foster home, and he said the foster parents were quick to call 911 instead of mediating and resolving the issue. It was his first arrest, and neither of the boys were seriously injured. But Randy was incarcerated for 14 months in the juvenile detention center. So it just kind of draws the connection between the foster care system and how quickly they can just be funneled into the prison industrial complex.
Great, thanks, Megan. So I just thank you so much, Megan, for sharing all of that data. I think it's important for us to see and understand that this issue of incarceration and kinship care is multifaceted, right? You have the parents who are incarcerated and what that means for the children. As you saw from the data that Megan shared, a majority of the men and women in prison have children. So what does that mean for those children? Where are those children? Who is taking care of those children, as Megan asked? And then the other piece that we wanted to highlight was this prison, the foster care to prison pipeline, where there's a vicious cycle of foster youth ending up in prison as well. And so there's also data around foster children having children themselves, and then their children ended up in foster care. And if you're a foster child and you were not connected to your family, then your child doesn't have the option of even a kinship care provider. And of course, we don't want our foster youth or youth who have any connection to the child welfare system to end up in these situations. So I think it's important for us to discuss those nuances. And then in addition to that, to recognize that these systems are really interconnected, not only the foster care system to the prison system and where kinship fits into that, but also the foster system and the incarceration system as it connects to immigration. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Daniel, who's going to share more about these connections and help us to understand how immigration is connected to incarceration, as well as what it means for kinship care.
And so we live unfortunately in a society that has a reality where sometimes like governments and systems make a bad situation a lot worse. And so, and to add to that, we live in communities sometimes, especially Black communities, especially Latino communities, that are oftentimes over-policed. And so, and sometimes in those communities, there's immigrant populations that might be in the country, might be undocumented. And so a quick statistic, so we know that the Black community is over-policed. We know that the Latino community is over-policed. And so then that can funnel them into the prison system. And for Black and Latino immigrants that are funneled into the prison system, a lot of times that can trigger a lot of immigration complications. And so, and just to break down some statistics, right? So there's a 45% chance if you are convicted of a crime that it will lead to your removal of the country. That's across the board amongst all immigrants. But if you break it down even more, it's a 76% chance for Black immigrants. So it's a lot more, right? So, and it's also really important to look at the statistics for the Black immigrants that make up the population. So the Black immigrant population is only 7% of the total immigrant population. And 20% of them are led into deportation. So, so you know, that kind of shows you already, right, from the prison system into immigration. And then we can go to the next slide, please. And so a lot of times that creates complications, right, for families that have been here for a while and they have children that are born here in the U.S. You know, you can categorize those folks as mixed status families. And again, it's like it can be a family that has U.S. citizens and a relative that's undocumented or has mixed status, you know, and that can include their parents, that can include a brother, it can include an uncle. And then there's unaccompanied minors that I'm sure many of you might remember that during the crisis, right, there was a lot of unaccompanied minors coming into the country without parents or without a guardian. And they also face complications, right, because they're coming alone. Sometimes they have family members that are already in the U.S., and so they're trying to reunite with them. A lot of times the unaccompanied minors might leave their countries completely unexpected overnight because they get, you know, threatened by gangs. They might experience gender violence. And a lot of times with parents or children that do face threats like that, they oftentimes leave the country for their safety and they come to the U.S. And so I'm going to dive into a little bit into the unaccompanied minors and the mixed status families and how they're affected. So, you know, in 2019, there was a record high apprehensions of minors. About 76,000 were apprehended. And then of those 76,000, about 2/3 were able to get sponsors, meaning people that are able to take them in, right? And sometimes that can mean sponsors that are relatives that are already in the U.S. And even that has complications. So, for example, if they do identify a sponsor, a potential sponsor, they might also be undocumented or have some sort of immigrant status. And so, unfortunately, we live in a reality where basically Homeland Security and the Department of Health and Human Services, they are collaborating in terms of like giving information. So let's say the Human Service Department does get in contact with a sponsor. They're in an agreement with ICE that they can share their information, and that can actually put them in jeopardy of being deported themselves. And so what these immigrant sponsors have to do sometimes, if they're a family relative, they have to choose between taking in a family member or a loved one, or they might deem it too risky to even do it, right? So that forces that unaccompanied minor into the foster system, you know, ripping them apart from their culture, they're speaking their language, and just feeling more comfortable around somebody that's a lot more familiar with them than a system, right? And then let's say they do decide to take in a family member. Throughout the whole process, they are also just deterred. Like, let's say they're immigrants and they take in an unaccompanied minor. Throughout the whole process of them taking care of them, because of anti-immigrant policies, they might be deterred or even punished for seeking resources. So a more recent anti-immigrant policy is public charge. And basically public charge is if you're undocumented or you're immigrant and you're looking to get naturalized, you have to basically prove that you won't be basically like a financial burden to the country and the system, or a public charge, right? So if you're using government resources to help you in the child's development, even though the child might qualify, it can it can complicate your pathway to citizenship, and immigration officers can actually deny it. And so not only are they kind of deterred from the very beginning from taking in the loved one, throughout the whole process, they're basically kind of almost forced to basically not seek any government resources. And Yeah, so another situation is the mixed status families. And, we, in the country, there's about 5.1 million children in the U.S. that live with parents that are undocumented. And about 80% of those children are U.S. citizens. And then about a quarter of the 3.7 million immigrants that were deported between 2003 and 2013 had U.S. Citizen children. And then, so, what happens to those children? Where do they go if they don't have a parent anymore that's taking care of them? 1 in 5 of them go into grandfamilies or are taken care of by their grandparents. But of those 1 of 5, they're immigrant grandparents. And again, they face challenges where they have to basically raise their grandchildren in the shadows, where they might be a little scared to take on public resources, and it forced them into informal kinship care. And there's a lot of incidents. I used to work for an immigrant hotline number in the Bay Area where people will call in case of ICE emergencies. And sometimes I would get calls from clients or community members that, especially during the whole border crisis when it was at its peak, community members would literally call me like, hey, a family member is calling me from my home country. They want me to take in their child that was apprehended at the border, but they never informed me of this. I want to do the right thing, but I'm just not well equipped. Basically happened overnight, and I feel bad saying no. And is there some way you can help me, right? So not only, it's basically happened out of the blue, right? So imagine just sitting at home, you're not even thinking about it, and you get a call like, hey, can you take in a child? It's an emergency, and it's a family member. It's pretty hard to say no. And there's a lot of barriers that you're going to face, right? Especially if you're not going to get any help when you're not expecting it, when you're not expecting the child to come in, and you're not going to get any help. It's completely complicated, and it can actually, harm the child. There's other incidents where I used to work as an immigrant rights organizer. We would prepare families. We would have workshops where basically it was family preparation plans. And literally these workshops, we would prepare families in case they are deported. Like, we would sit with them, tell them, always have like packed clothes. You should probably have a notary to give children like rights to like a loved one in case you are deported. And so, this was during the very beginning of the anti-immigrant rhetoric that was being pushed around. So, a lot of families lived in fear. They were basically preparing for being separated from their children, which is traumatic on its own, right? Hopefully it doesn't happen to many people. But that's a reality that the parents are preparing for, right?
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel, for giving us that context and also for sharing about your experience at the call center and as an immigrant rights lawyer. I think, again, we want to help you all understand the intersections between these different systems and how they impact the families, and especially how they impact kinship caregivers or potential kinship caregivers, because we want to make sure the children are able to stay connected to loved ones. Ideally, we could prevent these things from happening, but if they do have to go into kinship placement, what does that look like? And as Daniel was sharing, I think one of the things that we want to really reiterate over and over again is that, as you all know, a lot of these kinship placements are not actual formal placements through DCFS or, we're all in LA County, right? So we always refer to the Department of Children and Family Services. And I know that the names are different, Department of Health Services, wherever you are in the state, whatever department is focused on child welfare, they're not always formally involved, right? When children's parents are arrested, sometimes the child welfare department gets involved, and other times it's not, it's informal. And these informal placements also need supports. And that's one of the things that we really want to hone in on in our discussion around recommendations and like suggestions we have for how do we provide information to get to family members who are taking care of children because of an incarcerated parent, because of a parent who's been deported, when they don't sometimes they don't even realize that there are services available to them. And sometimes they don't know that they can tap into these, even though the children are not formally in the system. So now I'm going to turn it over to Takaija, and she's going to share more about what those types of recommendations could look like.
Hi, everybody. My name is Takaija Bryant, and Lamika, if you can go to the next slide, that'd be great. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can support these families and how we can really kind of rally around this community and provide them the supports that they need. And hopefully with this knowledge, it's going to be, a high level overview. Hopefully with this knowledge, you all can go back into your rightful lanes and we can provide even more to this population. So just a few things to keep in mind as we talk about supporting families. It's really important, as stated before in the presentation, that we recognize that most people in kinship care or who are kinship care providers are touching both injustice systems or have experience with both. And of course, that's by design. You can call it conspiracy theories or things like that. But these systems are so interconnected, families have experiences with both, which also means that they are probably overwhelmed, fed up, not getting what they deserve, not getting what they need. So that's really important to keep in mind when we talk about resources and providing assistance to these folks. We also wanted to keep in mind that grandparents, of course, are usually the face of a kinship care provider, but kinship care providers come in all people, shapes, sizes, colors, and everything in between. Personal experience, I was 22 or 23 years old living in Washington, D.C., taking on my first job on Capitol Hill, which pays nothing if you know anything about the federal government. And I got a call from a social worker. My sister needed placement. I was next on the list and they sent her to DC. I got little to no support, but I wasn't as established as maybe my grandparents would have been at the time or my aunt who was older than me at the time, but I was still considered a kinship care provider. So that can be family friends, sometimes it can even be a neighbor, depending on the relationship with the neighbor. It can be a sister, an aunt, an uncle third removed. So let's keep that in mind. With that said, there's no place for assumptions when we're talking about kinship care providers and this particular population. And I wanted to put that in because it's a very nuanced conversation that we're having. So me at 22 being a kinship care provider is not going to be the same as me at 28 being a kinship care provider. My needs are different. The youth that I'm taking in or the family member that I'm taking in, their needs are also going to be different. If I were to become a kinship care provider now, my sister has an infant child. So some of the resources that I would need access to are going to be a little bit greater than a few years ago when she was with me by herself. So I like to always reiterate that no two cases are the same, but we still need resources to cover our population. And last but not least, we're going to always keep the children and the youth and the family members in mind, because at the end of the day, if we really do believe that children are the future, it's really important that we invest in these healthy family units and structures to ensure that our youth are cared for and they can grow up to be well adults. They have everything that they need to be successful adults. And one thing, I worked on Capitol Hill with Congresswoman Bass. She used to always tell people when they would come in and lobby us or we'd speak, she would always say, what do your children need? If your children or your sister or your siblings need that, these children need it just as much. So we always want to keep that in mind, and that just kind of helps us bring it back to reality and hits home for us. So some of the recommendations that we came up with, and again, these are just high-level recommendations, just something to get you all thinking. And these recommendations tie into both immigration and incarceration, and you'll notice that there's a general theme. But some things I came up with were, we need to provide life documents to kinship care providers. So again, with my own personal experience, my sister, and I don't know, I don't want to blame anyone, but I do think DCFS kind of they missed the ball on this one. But it's really hard to enroll a youth in school with no birth certificate or no social security card. It's really hard to obtain these documents if you don't have legal guardianship, you don't have any paperwork. And if you think about what Daniel and Lamika said earlier, lots of these youth are in informal kinship care placements. So how do I get access to your birth certificate? How do I get access to your social security card? The whole object or the whole goal is to maintain normalcy in these children's lives, in these youth's lives. So we want to make sure that they can stay in school or that they can get enrolled immediately. But the whole process should shut down when that kinship care provider does not have access to important life documents. Also, transportation assistance for providers who may be transporting youth to visit their parents. One thing about my life growing up, my mom was in and out of jail and or prison most of my life. And luckily, my grandparents had their own vehicle. They didn't really rely on the county to provide much assistance as far as gas and things like that. But there are families who don't have any means of transportation. Everyone still believes in these bus tickets and the bus barely runs. And we still, again, want to maintain normalcy in our children's lives. So we need to create some type of network or some type of incentive to get people to the prisons, to the detainment center, to the jail, so they can visit their parents. Their parents don't have to be punished by not seeing their children because of maybe a mistake that they made or not made. And that's a whole nother conversation. We also, if you could go back, Mikia, I think there's providing case status updates to detained and incarcerated parents. I think it's really important that just because someone is detained or they're incarcerated, that does not mean that they don't need updates on their children and their family lives. So that's really important. Maybe pairing with an advocate of some sort, and then opening the lines of communication for parents to kinship providers and their children. It is really expensive to maintain or to keep money on your phone sometimes to collect calls from jail or prison. So figuring out a way to open those lines of communication would be really helpful. Next slide. And I know we're running out of time, so I'll hurry up. So here are some policy suggestions based on the two different topics that we're talking about. The first bullet on each for incarceration and immigration are similar. I think creating info packets in schools, medical centers, places of worship, immigration lawyer offices, CBOs, any type of community organization or company, just public spaces in general, providing info packets on what kinship care is and what resources are available in their county or their community. A lot of people have no clue, especially being that most of these placements are informal. It's really important that we disseminate this information as largely as possible. For the incarceration side, deploy a kinship resource advocate to prisons, jails, and detention centers. So that one was personal to me. There are different types of advocates who may come and speak about college and GEDs and education for prisoners, or people who are incarcerated, But maybe if we had someone from a nonprofit or even from the county who regularly went into prisons and detainment centers and jail houses to talk about what resources may be available for their families, that could be extremely helpful, because then the incarcerated person can relay the information to their family. Also, DCFS to create a legal toolkit for kinship care providers when a parent is incarcerated, basically just detailing what my rights are as this new provider, kinship care person, or kinship care provider and guardian of this child or youth. Going to the immigration side, redefining the relationship between ICE or DHS and HHS. Basically, there's information that's being shared that can jeopardize a person's immigration or their status here in America or in this country. And it's really important that sometimes caseworkers use discretion when sharing this information. And I think this is a federal level policy change that we would want to implement, but there definitely needs to be some deconstruction of relationships and rebuilding. Revisit, reimagine, and redefine sanctuary city policies. There are some outdated policies, some policies that may need to be updated or reinstituted or even created. So constant revisiting of sanctuary city policies is extremely important. And I think with a backing of nonprofits and government organizations and grassroots organizations would be extremely important to make sure that these policies are constantly updated as society changes and as populations change and grow, so do our policies. And then the last thing, strengthen case manager curriculum on this front, because again, most people in the social work side of things are very overwhelmed, but sometimes discretion is not advised. Sometimes caseloads are extremely overwhelming for one individual. I think it's really important to strengthen the curriculum to have people understand that they are dealing with a very vulnerable population and how can we best service them, because that ultimately is the job. So, or that's the goal. So those were all of the policy suggestions and recommendations that we were able to come up with. If anyone has any questions, please let me know.
Great. Well, thank you to Lamika and the team for that presentation. We'd like to now open it up to anyone on the webinar today that maybe has some questions. And here we're joined with Mikia Castillo. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Okay, we have our first question. It is, in addition to the family preparation classes, are there basic guidelines, cheat sheets that families and or organizations can access to prepare families?
Hi, thanks everybody for joining, and also thank you Melissa and Claire for inviting me. It's an honor to be here with you. As they mentioned, my name is Mikia Castillo. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And my team and I were really honored to present to the Kinship Care Council that United Ways of California is hosting, and they're doing some great thinking around how to support kinship caregivers. So thank you for that important work. With regards to the first question around a cheat sheet, so I actually have been working with an organization here in LA called DCFS, Give Us Back Our Children. And it's an organization that has been advocating to prevent children from going into foster care in the first place. And recently they've written a book that they are trying to get published. And I know they're in conversation with some of the the parent lawyers here in Los Angeles County. And the book is a guide to supporting family members, whether it's the birth family or kinship caregivers or relatives, with knowing their rights and what they have access to. So I don't know about any specific cheat sheets. I know, you know, if you become if you go through the process of becoming a resource family, which is a requirement in the state of California for anyone who's going to be a kinship caregiver, there is information that you are given to help you figure out how to navigate the system. But that's once the children are in the system. So in terms of a cheat sheet for families who, as Daniel and Megan both mentioned in their portion of the presentation, for those individuals who are informally involved in kinship care, meaning they don't have, you know, DCFS involved in their particular family situation, getting a cheat sheet I think is a really great idea. And I feel like the work that DCFS Give Us Back Our Children is doing is a really good place to start, because they have a lot of insight into the laws, and those resources should be made available to families, whether they're formally in the system or informally in the system. And that's my baby in the background chiming in saying, yes, everybody needs access to these resources.
I just want to say that it's very important, definitely, as we work with families, because quite often, you know, it's kind of like every organization is trying to reinvent the wheels as we work with families. And that's why, you know, I think it's so important for us to have a guidelines already in place that we can all access, because we're all trying to figure out what to do when we come across one of those families. And you know, if we could just all partner and put together something that we can prepare families. I work with disaster preparedness, and I know how critical it is to prepare. And so this is a disaster for many families. And so how critical it is for us to have proper guidelines and prepare families in the event that, you know, they face some type of deportation, or they can't return home, or, you know, anything. So I think it would be a good opportunity for us to actually really all get involved in establishing some guidelines.
I absolutely agree. And I think that having this new Kinship Navigator site that the United Ways of California has put together that Claire shared at the beginning of the presentation is a powerful first step, right? Because resources have not been curated in such a way that they said for kinship caregivers, here's where you can go to find whatever you need. But I think that what you just mentioned, I didn't catch your name, but it seems like that would be a really great resource to also have on the website if we're able to pull something together like that to say, hey, you know, here are all of the things that you need to think about when you become a kinship caregiver, whether that is formally or informally. And here's the website that you can go to find those resources to curate that, you know, based on whatever your needs are for your family. I think it's a brilliant idea. And I'll put in the chat what I just mentioned, which is DCFS Give Us Back Our Children. Oh, I actually don't think I can put it in the chat.
If you send it to Melissa, she can broadcast it to everyone. She's got the hostings. Great, thank you, Lamika. It's really helpful. Melissa, did other questions come in through the chat?
We have, is there an outreach program already designed to outreach with religious organizations who often have large groups of immigrants?
You know, that's a great question. I'm not really sure if that exists. I think that's actually probably a question for United Way, if United Way has any knowledge of that. From my perspective, I know a lot of churches are doing some work to try to support you know, immigrant families and figuring this out, but I haven't seen as much of a concerted effort around kinship care specifically because a lot of people don't think of kinship care in concert with immigration. So I think that there's a lot of work that can be done here.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Catholic Charities is doing a lot of work throughout the state with the Catholic Church, but like you said, Lamika, I haven't heard of specific programs for kinship families. So thank you to whoever asked that. We will do some research. And if you want to send us an email, we'd be happy to follow up with you if we learn anything.
The next question is, do these children qualify for exceptions under McKinney-Vento, which requires schools to accept homeless kids immediately and without delay while paperwork is being processed?
So that is a really great question, and the answer to that is extremely complicated, right? So McKinney-Vento does have exceptions, and actually foster youth specifically are granted similar rights, I guess if you will, right? Certain rights because they're foster children to access education opportunities that are similar to that of homeless youth, right? So for example, when I was a kinship caregiver, I knew that one of the rights that the child had, not me as a kinship care parent, but she did as the child, was that we were supposed to be able to enroll her in school immediately without any delays and get her into a classroom that met all of her needs, right? There was a lot of trauma involved, so she had rights to certain types of therapy in the school. I will say that did not happen for us here in Los Angeles. We went through 4 or 5 schools, including 2 of our closest local schools. It took a few days before we were actually able to enroll her in a school, and I had to basically threaten a lawsuit to say you are in violation of federal law, not even just state law, because McKinney-Vento is at the state level. Federal law says that children are supposed to receive access to high quality education at any school of their choosing if they are in foster care, especially when the child is dealing with a lot of trauma and it has had to move around quite a bit. Those rules are in place. That does not mean that the school districts follow those rules and they come up with reasons why they can't. So for example, with our kinship placement, she was 6 years old and it was a formal placement. It was through the Department of Children and Family Services. And so she was in 1st grade, she was behind in her education. So we knew we needed some tutoring programs, in addition to the law requiring that children in foster care receive access to education immediately, even if you don't have any documentation or paperwork. You also are supposed to be able to get tutoring. You're supposed to be able to get counseling on site at the school if they have it. And so we asked for these things. And even though the schools had them, we were told, well, she has to be put on a wait list because the school year has already started and we have a wait list. And I would tell them, yeah, but this is a different circumstance. And I know the policy, the law. And they say, okay, well, you have to take it up with the lawyer. That was literally the response is, okay, if you want this, take it up with the lawyer. Luckily, the school we enrolled her in, the principal happened to be a foster parent herself. And so she had navigated the system herself and understood the challenges. So when we spoke initially with the person at the front office, they said the same thing, our school is impacted. We have a wait list for students, even though it's a public school, and you don't live in, you live outside of this, not the school district, but the zoned area. And I explained to them, well, this, my office is down the street. I tried to enroll her in the school closest to home, our home school. They wouldn't accept her. They said I had to go to a wait list and I don't have time to go take it up with the lawyer. She needs to get her education, right? So even though those policies are in place, there are barriers. And I will also say that, again, because of the informal nature of kinship care, there are so many children who don't have paperwork from the Department of Children and Family Services that says, yes, this child is in foster care formally. Yes, we understand that this is their grandma or their aunt, but they are still a foster child. And yet as the school, you have to provide them with services. No, we don't have their birth certificate yet. No, we don't have, their vaccination records yet. All of those different things. If you are in an informal placement at like some of the immigrant children that Daniel talked about, or some of the children whose parents are incarcerated, but a grandparent or sister or aunt or uncle stepped in before DCFS did, then they don't have those same rights. And that's why we were advocating for changes to some of these policies to make sure that they do have access to the same kinds of rights, because the trauma is still there and it's still an issue for them.
Thank you. I think actually that is very important. We were just recently working with a dad whose kids were in foster care, and he got his kids back, but then their paperwork was not in place or anything. And so at one point the school said, well, we can't enroll them until we get their health pass. And ironically, it was the homeless liaison at the school who told me, well, they qualify under McKinney-Vento. And so the kids were enrolled immediately, and so we worked on all the missing paperwork and so forth. But I think it just highlights the importance of actually building those, those networks and talking to our schools and different organizations, so we are all on the same page and we know exactly what we're dealing with before, we have to deal with an incident. Just having those resources and that network and that partnership is key.
So true. Thank you, Zenaida. I really appreciate that comment. So I do see that it's already 10 o'clock. So I think we will have to wrap up, but I just want to invite all of you on the call, if you have additional questions, please reach out. You can contact us through the website. If our kinship specialists can't answer them, we've got great partners like Lamika and her team we can reach out to. But this is where our work is, right? Making sure that we're finding the right information for all of our families. So thank you all so much for being here. Lamika, thank you for all the work you and your team did. Thank you for that presentation and just your partnership throughout this. We're really, really grateful to be working with you. And I think we'll wrap it up so you all can get on with your day. But we will be sending a recording of this, and you can also find it on our social media channels.
Excellent. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Melissa. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
You too. Bye.